Jason had always been the kind of man who followed his own heart. He never cared much about what others thought of him. But even he was surprised by the reactions he got when he told his friends and family that he was marrying Monique. At first, there was silence, a long, awkward silence that made Jason shift in his seat. Then came the fake smiles and forced congratulations, but behind those smiles, he could see the truth. Some of them were shocked. Others looked like they were holding back laughter. And a few didn't even try to hide their disapproval. "She's just not what I expected for you," one of his close friends said hesitantly. Jason knew what that meant. They thought he could do better. They thought Monique wasn't good enough for him. His family wasn't any better. His mother sighed, shaking her head as if he had made a terrible mistake. His father patted him on the back and said, "Well, if you're happy, that's what matters." But Jason could tell from his tone that he didn't really mean it. His cousins and uncles exchanged glances, smirking, as if Jason had lost his mind. Then came the whispered jokes. Jason wasn't foolish. He knew what people were saying behind his back. He had overheard a few of them. Maybe he couldn't find anyone else. "Cheese. A little too much, don't you think? I wonder how long this will last." It wasn't just the words that hurt. It was the way they laughed, the way they dismissed Monique as if she wasn't worthy of love. Jason didn't care about people's opinions, but it hurt him to see how little respect they had for the woman he loved. Monique was kind, strong, and incredibly smart. She had a warm, infectious laugh that could brighten anyone's day. She was ambitious, working hard to build a business from the ground up. But none of that seemed to matter to people who judged her just by her appearance. One night, Jason sat with his best friend, hoping for some support. Instead, he got the same reaction. "Look, man," his friend said, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret. "I'm not saying she's a bad person, but let's be real. You could have had anyone. Why her?" Jason clenched his jaw, trying to keep his cool. "Because she makes me happy," he said simply. His friend sighed, shaking his head. "I just hope you don't regret it later." Regret? Jason couldn't believe what he was hearing. He had never been more certain about anything in his life, but it seemed like no one else could see what he saw in Monique. As their wedding day approached, things got worse. Some of Jason's friends started distancing themselves. A few even made excuses not to come to the wedding. "Oh, something came up," they said. "I'll try to make it." But Jason knew they wouldn't. Even his family members, the ones who did plan to come, treated it more like an obligation than a celebration. His mother fussed over details, making sure everything looked respectable. His father just nodded along, as if going through the motions. But Jason didn't let their judgment shake him. He loved Monique, and that was all that mattered. He could see what they couldn't, that she was an incredible woman, far more than they gave her credit for. And one day, they would realize their mistake. Jason and Monique's wedding day arrived, but it didn't feel the way Jason had imagined it. A wedding was supposed to be a joyful occasion, filled with love and support from family and friends. But instead of excitement, there was a strange feeling in the air, like some people were only there out of duty, not because they wanted to celebrate with him. Monique looked stunning in her wedding dress, her face glowing with happiness. She had spent months preparing for this day, making sure everything was perfect. She wanted it to be a moment to cherish forever, a symbol of the love she and Jason shared. But even as she smiled, Jason could see the sadness in her eyes. She had noticed what he had noticed: the empty seats, the forced smiles, the lack of warmth from some of the guests. Many of Jason's friends had decided not to come. They had made excuses, saying they were too busy or something important had come up. But Jason knew the truth. They didn't approve of his choice, and they didn't want to be part of a wedding they secretly didn't believe in. Some of his relatives were there, but their expressions made it clear they weren't happy. His mother sat stiffly in her seat, barely speaking to Monique's family. His cousins whispered among themselves, casting glances at the bride as if she were some kind of joke. Jason's best man, one of his oldest friends, stood beside him. But even he seemed distant. He hadn't cracked a single joke all morning, which was unusual for him. As the ceremony began, Jason stole a glance at him, hoping for a reassuring smile. Instead, he saw hesitation, like his friend wanted to pull him aside and ask, "Are you sure about this?" But Jason was sure. More than anything, he was sure. When Monique walked down the aisle, Jason's heart swelled with love. She was everything he had ever wanted, everything he had ever needed. He couldn't understand why people couldn't see that. Why did they care so much about things that didn't matter? Why did they judge her based on looks and background instead of her heart? The vows were exchanged, the rings were placed, and finally, they were announced as husband and wife. There was applause, but it wasn't as loud as it should have been. Jason could feel the lack of enthusiasm from certain guests. It made him angry, but he refused to let it ruin this moment. This was their day, and no one could take it from them. At the reception, things weren't much better. Some guests barely interacted with Monique, offering her short, polite words before moving on to talk to people they were more comfortable with. A few even left early, claiming they had somewhere else to be. Jason saw it all, and it only strengthened his resolve. He didn't need their approval. He had chosen Monique because she was his partner, his best friend, the woman who made him truly happy. But Monique wasn't blind to any of it. She had noticed the coldness, the stares, the hushed conversations. She kept her chin up, smiling through it all. But Jason could see the hurt underneath. She had done nothing wrong, yet she was being treated like an outsider. As the night went on, Jason took Monique's hand and led her outside, away from the crowd. Under the soft glow of the fairy lights, he held her close and whispered, "None of them matter. It's just you and me." Monique nodded, squeezing his hand. "I know, but it still hurts." Jason kissed her forehead. "They'll regret this one day. I promise you that." And deep down, he knew he was right. The first few months of marriage were a mix of happiness and challenges for Jason and Monique. They were deeply in love, and every moment they spent together felt special. But outside their little world, the judgment from others hadn't disappeared. Jason's friends still kept their distance. Some of them barely called anymore. The ones who did would talk to him, but always avoided asking about Monique. It was as if they were waiting for Jason to admit he had made a mistake. His family wasn't much different. His mother would check on him now and then, but every conversation seemed to carry an unspoken question. "Are you happy? Really?" As if she didn't believe it was possible. But Jason was happy, and Monique was determined not to let anyone's negativity affect their life together. Instead of wasting time on people who didn't believe in them, she focused on her dreams. She had always wanted to start her own business, something she was passionate about. Monique had a deep love for fashion, but not the kind of fashion that only catered to one type of beauty. She wanted to create something for women like her, curvy, confident, and unafraid to stand out. She had noticed how difficult it was to find stylish clothes that actually celebrated plus-sized women. So, she decided to change that. With Jason's full support, she started small. She designed a few outfits, shared them on social media, and reached out to people who might be interested. At first, there wasn't much response. Some people still doubted her, just like they had doubted their marriage. But Monique didn't give up. She worked tirelessly, learning about marketing, improving her designs, and connecting with women who needed what she was offering. Slowly, things began to change. More and more people started noticing her work. Women who had always struggled to find clothes that made them feel beautiful were drawn to her designs. Orders started coming in, first in small numbers, then more and more each month. Her social media following grew, and before long, she was being invited to speak on platforms about body positivity and self-confidence. Jason watched with pride as Monique's business started taking off. He saw how passionate she was, how much she believed in what she was doing. She wasn't just selling clothes, She was giving people confidence, making them feel seen and valued. But the best part, the same people who had once laughed at their marriage, who had whispered behind their backs, were now starting to take notice. Some of Jason's old friends, the ones who had distanced themselves, suddenly started showing interest. "Hey, man," one of them messaged in one day, "I saw Monique's brand on Instagram. It's really taking off. That's pretty cool." Jason just smiled. Now they wanted to acknowledge her. Now they wanted to act it as if they had always supported them. Even his family started changing their tone. His mother, who had once been unsure about Monique, began asking questions about her business. His cousins, who had exchanged glances at their wedding, were now sharing her posts online. Jason knew why. They were starting to see what he had always seen in Monique, a strong, intelligent, and unstoppable woman. But this was just the beginning. The world was about to see what Monique was truly capable of. Monique's business was growing faster than anyone had expected. What had started as a small project with just a few designs was now turning into something much bigger. More and more women were discovering her brand, and they loved what she was offering. It wasn't just about clothing. It was about confidence, self-love, and celebrating beauty in all forms. Every day, Monique received messages from women who had struggled to find outfits that made them feel beautiful. They shared their stories, telling her how her designs had changed the way they saw themselves. Some had spent years feeling invisible, believing that fashion wasn't meant for them. But Monique was proving them wrong. She was showing them that they deserved to feel just as stylish and confident as anyone else. With each passing month, orders increased. Monique had to hire a small team to help her manage everything. She worked day and night, making sure every detail was perfect. She wanted her brand to stand for something bigger than just clothes. Then, something incredible happened. A well-known influencer in the fashion industry noticed Monique's designs and featured them in a video. The response was overwhelming. Within hours, Monique's website was flooded with visitors. Orders poured in at a rate she had never seen before. Jason watched in amazement as his wife handled it all, with grace and determination. He had always believed in her, but now the world was seeing what he had known all along. Monique was unstoppable. Soon, magazines began reaching out for interviews. Journalists wanted to know more about the woman behind the brand. Monique shared her journey, talking about the struggles she had faced, the criticism she had received, and how she had turned it all into motivation. Meanwhile, the people who had once laughed at her were starting to regret their words. Jason's old friends, the ones who had distanced themselves when he married Monique, now acted as if they had always supported her. "Hey, man," one of them said when they ran into each other, "I saw Monique on TV the other day. That's amazing. You guys are really doing great." Jason simply nodded, remembering how the same person had once told him he could do better. It was funny how quickly people changed when they saw success. Even his family's attitude had shifted. His mother, who had once questioned his choice, was now proudly telling her friends about Monique's success. She had gone from being unsure about her daughter-in-law to boasting about how talented and hardworking she was. One evening, Jason and Monique sat on their balcony, looking at the city lights. It had been a long journey, but they had made it through together. "Did you ever imagine this?" Monique asked, leaning her head on Jason's shoulder. "I always knew you were going to do something big," Jason said with a smile. "I just didn't know it would happen so fast." Monique sighed. "It's funny, isn't it? The same people who doubted us are now trying to be a part of our success." Jason chuckled. "That's how life works, but we don't need their approval. We never did." Monique nodded. She had spent so much time proving herself, but now she realized something important. She had never needed anyone's validation. She had always been enough, just as she was. And now, the world finally saw it too. As Monique's success continued to grow, the changes in people's attitudes became even more obvious. The same people who had once doubted her and laughed at her behind her back were now acting like they had always supported her. Jason could see it clearly, and so could Monique. Jason's old friends, the ones who had refused to come to the wedding, suddenly started reaching out. They sent him messages, acting friendly, pretending as if nothing had ever happened. "Hey man, it's been a while. We should catch up sometime. Wow, I saw Monique's brand in a magazine. That's incredible. You must be so proud. I always knew she had something special. You guys are an inspiration." Jason couldn't help but shake his head at their sudden change in behavior. These were the same people who had laughed at him when he said he was going to marry Monique. They had thought she wasn't good enough for him, and now they wanted to act like they had believed in her from the beginning. Even his family had changed the way they treated Monique. His mother, who had once been distant and unsure, now invited Monique over more often. She praised her success and even introduced her to her friends with pride. "This is my daughter-in-law, Monique," she would say with a smile. "She owns a very successful fashion brand." It was as if she had forgotten how she used to hesitate when saying Monique's name, how she had once looked at her with doubt instead of admiration. But Jason and Monique remembered. They remembered everything. One day, Jason received a call from one of his old friends who had once told him he was making a mistake by marrying Monique. "Hey Jason, how have you been? Listen, I was wondering if you could help me out. I'm looking for new opportunities and I saw that Monique's company is hiring. Do you think you could put in a good word for me?" Jason couldn't believe what he was hearing. The same person who had doubted Monique now wanted a job at her company. He wanted to laugh at the irony, but instead he simply said, "I'll think about it," and ended the call. When he told Monique about it, she chuckled and shook her head. "Isn't it funny? They didn't respect me when I was just Jason's wife, but now that I'm successful, they suddenly want to be connected to me." Jason nodded. Success changes how people see you, but it doesn't change who they really are. Monique thought about it for a moment, and then smiled. "I don't need their approval. I never did." She was right. She had built everything on her own, without their support, without their encouragement. And now that she had proven them wrong, they wanted to act as if they had been on her side all along. But Jason and Monique knew the truth. They remembered who had been there for them when things were tough, and who had walked away. They had learned an important lesson. Some people only respect success, not the person behind it. And as they moved forward in their lives, they knew one thing for sure. They didn't need those people. They had each other, and that was enough. Monique's success kept growing, and so did her confidence. She was now not just a business owner, but a role model for many women. People invited her to speak at events, magazines featured her story, and celebrities even wore her designs. What had once been a small idea had now turned into something bigger than she had ever imagined. Jason, as always, stood by her side, supporting her every step of the way. He had never cared about what others thought, but he couldn't deny the satisfaction of watching the same people who once judged Monique now trying to praise her. One day, Jason's mother invited them over for dinner. This was something that rarely happened in the past, but lately she had been making more effort. When they arrived, they were surprised to see some of Jason's relatives there too. His cousins, aunts, and uncles, many of whom had once looked down on Monique, were now greeting her warmly. "You've done so well for yourself, Monique," one of his aunts said with a smile. "I always knew you had something special." Jason almost laughed at the lie. He remembered the way they had acted at the wedding, the whispers and judgment. But Monique, always gracious, simply smiled and thanked her. Throughout dinner, the conversation kept circling back to Monique's success. They asked her about her business, her future plans, and even jokingly hinted at whether she could help them with connections. It was clear they had changed their attitude not because they had truly accepted Monique, but because they now saw value in being connected to her. After dinner, when Jason and Monique were alone, she sighed. "It's funny, isn't it? A few years ago, they barely acknowledged me. Now they act like they've always been on my side." Jason took her hand. "People respect success, not the struggle it took to get there." But we know the truth." Monique nodded. She wasn't angry. She had moved past that. She had proven herself, not to them, but to herself. And that was all that mattered. A few weeks later, Monique received an invitation to a major fashion event in another city. It was an opportunity to showcase her designs to an even larger audience. Excited, she and Jason traveled together for the event. When they arrived, Monique was treated like a star. People who had never given her a second glance before were now eager to meet her. Photographers took her pictures, reporters asked her about her journey, and business executives wanted to partner with her. Jason watched with pride, knowing how much she had worked for this moment. He remembered the laughter, the doubts, the people who had said she wasn't good enough. And now, here she was, proving them all wrong. As the night went on, Monique took Jason's hand and whispered, "I don't think they're laughing anymore." Jason smiled. "No, they're not. And they never will again." They had won, not just in success, but in proving that love, determination, and self-belief were stronger than anyone's judgment. Monique's fashion brand had now become a household name. What started as a small dream had grown into something far bigger than she ever imagined. Her designs were being sold across the country, and she was receiving invitations to major fashion shows. She was even featured in interviews on television, where she spoke about her journey, self-confidence, and breaking beauty stereotypes. Jason watched her rise with pride. He had always known she was special, but now the world saw it too. The same people who had doubted her, who had whispered behind their backs, were now eager to associate themselves with her. One evening, Monique received an unexpected invitation. A prestigious fashion magazine wanted to feature her on their cover. It was one of the biggest achievements in the industry, a moment that could take her brand to the next level. She was overjoyed, and Jason couldn't have been prouder. When the magazine issue was released, it was everywhere. Monique stood on the cover, looking powerful and radiant. The headline read, "Breaking Barriers: How Monique Redefined Beauty and Success." People who had once ignored her were now sharing the magazine, acting as if they had always supported her. Jason's old friends posted about it online, commenting, "Proud of you guys," and always knew she would do great things. But Jason knew the truth. They had never believed in her until now. Even Jason's mother, who had once hesitated to accept Monique, proudly showed the magazine to her friends. "That's my daughter-in-law," she said, as if she had always supported her from the start. But Monique and Jason didn't need anyone's approval anymore. They had built their life together despite the doubts, despite the judgment. Now, those same people were watching in admiration. One afternoon, Jason received a call from an old friend who had laughed at his marriage. "Hey, man," the friend said, sounding nervous. "I just wanted to say, I was wrong. About everything. I shouldn't have judged Monique. She's amazing. And I see now that you made the right choice." Jason listened silently, thinking about how things had changed. He wasn't bitter. He didn't need an apology. He had never doubted his choice in the first place. "It's okay," Jason finally said. "I didn't need you to believe in her. I always did." The conversation ended, and Jason felt nothing but peace. He and Monique had already won. That evening, as they sat together in their beautiful home, Monique looked at Jason and smiled. "Remember when they all laughed at us?" she asked. Jason grinned. "Yeah, but look at us now." She nodded. "They regretted it." Jason took her hand. They sure did. They had built something stronger than anyone's judgment, love, success, and an unshakable belief in each other. And no one could ever take that away from them. Monique's success story continued to inspire people across the world. Her fashion brand had grown beyond anything she had imagined. Women everywhere loved her designs, not just because they were stylish, but because they carried a message. Beauty came in all shapes and sizes. She had built a movement, and the world was taking notice. Jason stood by her side through it all. He had never doubted her, never wavered in his support. He had watched her rise from a woman people mocked to a woman people admired. The transformation wasn't just in her career, but in the way the world saw her. One day, Monique was invited to give a TED talk about her journey. It was a huge moment, something she had never dreamed of doing. She stood on stage, looking out at the packed audience. Cameras were rolling, and millions of people would watch her speech online. She took a deep breath and began. "I wasn't always seen as someone worth admiring," she said. "In fact, when I married my husband, people laughed at us. They thought he was making a mistake. They judged me before they ever knew me." The room was silent, everyone listening closely. "But here's what I learned," she continued. "Other people don't define your worth. You do. If I had listened to those voices, if I had believed them, I wouldn't be standing here today. I wouldn't have built a business that empowers women. I wouldn't have found success. And most importantly, I wouldn't have found happiness." The audience erupted in applause. People stood, clapping, cheering for her. Jason sat in the front row, his heart full. He remembered the whispers at their wedding, the judgment, the cruel words. And now, here she was, standing on a stage, being celebrated. After the speech, Monique was approached by people who wanted to collaborate, work with her, and learn from her. She had become more than a businesswoman. She was a leader, a voice for those who had been overlooked for too long. A few days later, Jason and Monique were at home, reflecting on everything that had happened. They sat on their balcony, looking at the city lights. "I still remember the day we got married," Monique said. "The way people looked at me, the way they doubted me." Jason smiled. "And now, they admire you. They regret ever doubting you." Monique nodded. "But the best part, I never needed their approval in the first place. I just needed to believe in myself." Jason took her hand. "And I always believed in you." She squeezed his hand, her eyes filled with gratitude. That made all the difference. As they sat together, watching the stars, they knew their journey wasn't just about proving people wrong. It was about proving themselves right. About love, belief, and the power of never giving up. And the people who had once laughed at them, they weren't laughing anymore. They were watching, wishing they had seen what Jason had seen all along.